I don't recall.
And put your hand on the Bible. Swear to God you walked on the moon.
Remove one of fruit's protective layers.
We're here with Bartem Sibrelem, investigative journalist and writer, author. Bart, thank you so much for joining us for the interview.
Sure, glad to be here, Dan.
Great. I think a bunch of our listeners will probably be familiar with the fact of you getting punched by an astronaut. Which one was it?
Edwin Aldrin Jr.
Edwin Aldrin Jr. What other crazy things have happened to you? What stands out as like a memorable experience in your work?
Well, there's many of them.
Yep.
The next one that comes to mind is we produced the first film, A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon, and it was financed by a millionaire who builds rockets for NASA, who knows that the moon missions are fake. Mm-hmm. And he thought it was his patriotic duty to expose it. I was producing the film under the theory it might be true that they faked it. The film cost nearly $1 million. It's on the homepage of Sibrel.com. It's called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. About 3.5 years into the 7-year project, we were given a tape, classified footage from a whistleblower at NASA of the crew of Apollo 11, the alleged first mission to the moon, faking part of the moon mission right in front of your eyes with a third track of audio of the CIA telling them how to do it. That convinced me, it convinced 2 NBC News directors that they did indeed fake the moon landing, and that was a life-changing experience. And after that film came out, we produced a film called Astronauts Gone Wild, the title of which came after the fact, after I was punched by one astronaut, threatened to be punched by another, kicked by another, threatened to be shot. And in one particular case, we accidentally left a hot mic on an astronaut, and the camera operator forget to hit stop record. So while the camera is in the backseat of the rental car in the astronaut's driveway, after we showed him the classified footage, which upset him greatly, we were recording the private audio of him and his son in his house with the door closed. And they're discussing whether or not to call the CIA to have me killed, which would not be necessary if they really went to the moon. Lying about going to the moon is a satanic lie of gigantic proportions.
I don't hit people, but you're going to be on the deck unless you get...
I'm heading out. I appreciate it.
And get the hell out of my house. You ever get a gun to shoot them at them before they get out of the office?
We have a video camera running if you want to do it.
Right.
That would be great footage for us. See you later. In court, I hope.
Want to call the CIA? Have them whacked?
So those are the 2 outstanding moments. And if you get into the book, which just came out in German, from Cop Publishers, I was literally abducted by the CIA and interrogated with truth serum when I found the footage that proves they did not go to the moon. Again, 2 NBC News directors agreed it proved that they did not go to the moon, and NBC was threatened with disconnecting their, network if they decided to broadcast it. So they chickened out.
Now, Bart, if you were... I would say that our audience is fairly open-minded about new theories, even conspiracy theories. But if you had to give, like, you have an elevator pitch, is the one where they're faking the moon picture through the window your best 30-second argument? How do you rope in someone that's really resistant to anything that has a whiff of conspiracy theory? Which one do you go with?
Well, you have to have an open mind to see the truth.
Yeah.
I've talked to college professors who said that if an Apollo astronaut confessed that it was fake, he'd still think he walked on the moon anyway. As far as a 30-second elevator pitch, you can prove the moon landing is fraud with logic.
Yep.
Today, with 55 years, better rockets and computers, the farthest that NASA can send an astronaut into space is 1,000th the distance to the moon. So what they're really claiming is when all of NASA combined, their computers had 1/1,000,000th the computing power of a cell phone, they sent astronauts 1,000 times farther into space on the first attempt ahead of schedule than they can do today. So what they're really claiming is for the first time in the history of the world, technology was greater in the past than in the future, which is impossible, which means they didn't go to the moon.
Right. I want to get back to that one about old technology that has disappeared. But before we get into the details, what about this? Tell us why it's so important to know the truth about the moon landing. I've talked to people who have said, look, I don't want to talk about 9/11. That was 24 years ago. Let's move on, modern times. And the moon landing was in 69. With all that's going on in Ukraine and Gaza and the national debt and the immigration problem, all the things we need to focus on, why is the moon landing so important?
Well, it's like, let's say, Dan, you and I lived in a neighborhood, and once a month for the last 50 years, a child disappears. Do we say, oh, well, it's just one of those things, happened 50 years ago or whatever? No, these people are at large. And they didn't just fake the moon landing, they murdered people to cover it up. Not my opinion, it's the opinion of the dead astronauts' widows and relatives who told me so. That the man who was going to be the first man to walk on the moon was murdered by the CIA for not cooperating with the fraud at NASA. So not only are these people faking moon landings that we're paying for our own deception. We're also paying for the salaries of the CIA agents who killed our brethren for trying to expose the crimes of the corrupt federal government. Now, our country was founded because King George became a tyrant, and it says whenever any government becomes destructive of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. Well, the first one is life. They're murdering their own people to do these particular frauds. And the real reason why it's important, either one is true. Either they planted a flag on the nearest rock and came back, didn't get killed, oh boy, that was a close one, even though they can only go 1,000th the distance 50 years later, or the most powerful nation on earth falsified mankind's greatest accomplishment and murdered their own people to cover it up while hypocritically claiming to represent truth and justice. If that's true, and I assure you it is, all the evidence you can see for free at Sibrel.com. If that's true, then the faking of the moon landing is so much more profound than if they had actually gone. Do you see that? It's so monumentally important. And if the public does not know the truth, that these criminals are lying to this degree, then it will be to our own ruin.
What do you think would happen if the truth about the moon landing were to become common knowledge and the majority of Americans, a great majority of Americans, knew what was going on?
Well, I was in Berlin twice when the wall was still up. And it was pretty much a frightening experience. I even helped someone defect from the KGB to the West. And when the wall came down, it was one of the most beautiful moments in the 20th century. And you can imagine right now, if our phones are ringing and your producer saying, stop what you're doing, turn on the TV, one of the Apollo astronauts is confessing right now. The world would become dead silent. We would stop and say, oh my gosh, is it really that bad? How far have we fallen? They didn't just fake the moon landing, they murdered many people to cover it up. We even have an eyewitness who saw them film the first fake moon landing at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. And he confessed that he murdered another worker at Cannon Air Force Base to keep it a secret. This is so much more profound than if they'd actually gone. And what's different about it is whoever killed JFK, you can change the hat on who did it and why. It's still tragic. Same with 9/11. You can change who did it and why. It's tragic. This is a positive lie, you see? And I come along and I want to take away this sweet, sweet candy and give them the bitter truth. And the public and even podcasters who claim they're anti-corruption are defending their own, perpetrators of all these crimes. Trump can tell the truth about JFK and RFK and MLK, but if he doesn't tell the truth about the moon landing fraud, then the deep state has won, and he's complicit with it. And actually, if he wants to get public support for reforming the government, cleaning house, according to the NBC News director, there's no better tool than to show the public how bad it has gotten than expose the moon landing fraud. After which he'd have Republicans and Democrats saying, look, we didn't know it was that bad. The fact is, Bobby Kennedy Jr., who has more access to the JFK files than Oliver Stone, said with his 100% certainty that the CIA killed his uncle, the President of the United States, because he was going to clean house. Then we have Robert McNamara, Defense Secretary, saying before he died that the Vietnam War, which the public was against, the entire reason why it was started, that Congress passed a law based on a lie. The Gulf of Tonkin attack, he said, never happened. So my point is, Dan, if the CIA is willing to kill their own president, willing to kill needlessly 58,220 of their own people, they're not going to have a problem faking a video image. And there is 4 times the proof necessary to prove it in a court of law that they did fake the moon landing. But it's a truth people do not want to hear. They would rather believe the lie. It's literally like Santa Claus for adults. It would temporarily embarrass the United States. But if you don't, it's worse to have college students and elementary students and the history books institutionalizing a lie. We need to know. Our eyewitness said that President Johnson was personally there at Cannon Air Force Base June 1st, 1968, to overlook the moon landing being filmed. And then 6 months later, about a year later, Nixon approved it. So we have both Republicans and Democratic presidents supporting this horrific and arrogant lie. It's really a blasphemous lie.
Yeah.
The Tower of Babel was never finished. It was to reach the heavens.
Yes.
What is putting a man on the moon? To reach the heavens. There's a famous writer who said about the Tower of Babel, the monument of their pride became a memorial to their folly. It was unfinished. The Messiah said, to start a tower and to not finish it is proclaiming yourself a fool. And then my film, again on the homepage of Sibrel.com, we show after that the Titanic. And they put in writing, Dan, the ship that God himself could not sink.
Yes.
And then Richard Nixon, when he knew they were not on the moon, nevertheless said, putting a man on the moon is second in greatness only to God making the universe. This is an important truth. It's so profound that mankind faked the moon landing. If we don't tell the truth, we will never be cured of this cancer.
Now, moving from Trump to Nixon, it's your opinion that Nixon definitely knew.
Of course he knew.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't show up for the launch. We have the Japanese president there. We have the German chancellor there. We have all the world leaders there except the president of the United States, who was afraid to show up and has a picture taken shaking Neil Armstrong's hand because maybe they would get caught and then it would look all the worse. After they got away with it, 6 months later, for the second launch, he shows up when people already were convinced we could put a man on the moon.
Did he give an official excuse for being absent at the first launch?
I think he said he had to walk his dog.
Come on.
Well, that's a little bit of a joke, but there would be no reason for him not being there.
Right.
Yeah. They would reschedule it so the president could be there. That's what they would do.
Yes. Now, you were on Joe Rogan for 3 hours.
And a half.
Do you think his interview was fair?
Fair? Well, here's the thing about fairness.
Yeah.
People think we have to hear their side of the story to be fair. That's the opposite of the truth. We've heard their story for 55 years.
Yeah, just turn on the TV.
Give our side, let us talk for 55 years, and then you're deserving of equal time. We already know what they think. We already know what they're going to say. Now, Joe Rogan told me privately that because new people are seeing this for the first time, he felt he had to do that.
Yeah.
I disagreed. However, he might have been right anyway, because one of the things on the homepage of Sibrel.com is this quote from someone who reviewed my book on Amazon, who said, basically, I thought the moon missions were real, never questioned it until I saw Bart Sibrel on Joe Rogan. And it became so obvious that they were fake. I read his book, and it's all the more obvious. Now it's absurd to think that they went on the first attempt with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone when they can't go 50 years later and can only go 1,000th the distance. Do you understand that? That's like saying Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927, 3,000 miles, but 50 years later in 1977, the farthest an airplane can fly is only 3 miles. do you realize after they blew up the first atomic bomb in 1945, 10 years later, atomic bombs were 1,000 times more powerful. So if we could go to the moon on the first attempt with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now, and there'd be bases all over the moon. 8 presidents have said 8 times we're going to return to the moon in 5 years, starting with Reagan.
Yep.
And then it was Bush Sr., then it was Clinton said it, then George Bush Jr. said it twice, then Obama said it, then Trump said it. They all said we're going to go to the moon in 5 years, and they can't do it. They said in 2014, by 2018, we're going to have people orbiting the moon, and they were 2 years behind schedule and only have mannequins orbiting the moon. They can drive cars on the moon and play golf on the moon in the 1960s, but today, the best they can do is send mannequins to orbit the moon. The truth is right in front of your eyes. I don't know why people can't see that.
Yes, that's one of the main things that struck me, that, come on, 1969 technology, and we haven't improved upon it to the point where we can do it again. And not just we, I mean, there are other countries that are quite rich now. You could say China, Russia, Japan, India, the European Union. Certainly they have the money and the technology to do it. Now, Rogan kind of attacked this point early on, and he said, yeah, but the scale of it, there was 400,000 people involved in this operation, and the willingness to go to that extent to do it again isn't there.
Well, that's just not true. The government does whatever they want to do, whether the people are for it or against it. Just look at all the wars that we've been involved in where the public was against it, but they do it anyway. And that's one of the reasons people say it must be real, because you couldn't keep a secret from hundreds of thousands of people.
What about that argument?
Well, that's just not true at all. The atomic bomb was the biggest secret during World War II. It involved 129,500 people, and only 8 knew what they were building. That's like saying Bank of America has 500,000 tellers, but do you really think what those tellers know about corruption in the bank and what the CEO knows are identical? Do we really think the CIA is so stupid to tell the guy making the glove or the door handle or the boot, hey, we're really not going to the moon? Be sure not to tell anybody. The fact is, Eugene Kranz, flight director, who I've spoken to personally, said someone in the command center during a launch can tell no difference whatsoever between a simulated flight and a, quote, real flight. It's just a bunch of numbers going by on a screen. So how could we know as a 4-year-old from our living room or watching it on video 20 years later?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, there are so many aspects to this. When I go to the debunkers on YouTube, or I go to the Wikipedia page trying to debunk everything you've discovered and other moon landing deniers have discovered, there's a lot in there. But just first of all, are there any moon landing denial arguments that Wikipedia and NASA don't even try to refute? They're just so solid that they don't even bother going there.
Well, my footage that I discovered of them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes.
It is uncannily convincing. During this segment, intended to be edited and played back later for the worldwide television audience, dated July 18th, 1969, Neil Armstrong condemns himself as he states that he is 130,000 miles out, or halfway to the moon, as the NASA flight log also states on this date, when he is in reality in low Earth orbit of a few hundred miles.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Here, during another segment, also intended to air after review, Neil Armstrong falsely explains to the viewers how the shot is attained by putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, as it would have to be if they were the claimed distance away from the Earth.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with a TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it.
Blue gas. See white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth.
This is a segment that they believed wasn't even being recorded, much less suitable for broadcast, for the lens was being zoomed out and the scene was being changed to that of an interior of the astronauts at work, and apparently the stop button popped back up on the recorder without notice. Here is the diffused work light that they used to see camera controls, but not throw light onto the spacecraft's wall. Here they remove part of the crescent insert. Finally, the iris is opened up and you can see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window.
Two NBC News directors agreed it proved they did not go to the moon. They flew me to New York, put me up in the Waldorf Astoria, paid me thousands of dollars for the exclusive license to break the story nationwide. The moon landings are fake. They got a threatening call from the federal government and they backed down. Even my critics agree. This is the crew of Apollo 11 pretending to be halfway to the moon. Then why would they be pretending to be halfway to the moon? They can't even go halfway. They can't leave Earth orbit. And what a surprise, 55 years later, they still cannot leave Earth orbit. That's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon. There's a number of reasons. The rocket did not have enough fuel. We have the original publications of von Braun. He says it's impossible to go to the moon in one rocket. It would take 3 rockets minimum, each taller than the Empire State Building, each weighing 800,000 tons. The Saturn V only weighed 2,500 tons instead of 800,000 tons, a difference of 30,000% times 3. Elon Musk said, and he has a rocket that is about 3 or 4 stories taller than the Saturn V. He says using that rocket, it can only go into Earth orbit. You'll have to make 8 fuel trips first, minimum, and from there go to the moon. They didn't do that. And then my book, Moon Man, has 17 interactive video clips. You can see them now at Sibrel.com, one of which is a NASA engineer saying that there's radiation between the Earth and the moon that you'd have to go through to reach the moon. All the orbital flights are well below it. He said it's dangerous or deadly, and the technology necessary to go through it and survive to the moon has not been invented yet. You see?
Yeah.
My name is Kelly Smith, and I work on navigation and guidance for Orion. We are headed 3,600 miles above Earth, 15 times higher from the planet than the International Space Station. As we get further away from Earth, we'll pass through the Van Allen belts, an area of dangerous radiation. Radiation like this could harm the guidance systems, onboard computers, or other electronics on Orion. Naturally, we have to pass through this danger zone twice, once up and once back. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space. We won't have astronauts inside. We won't have astronauts inside.
And then you could prove the moon landings are fake with one photograph. On the homepage of Sibrel.com, we show sunlight. You can check this yourself. Go out in a parking lot, your front yard, on a cloudless day. Look at two people, two trees, two telephone poles. The shadows always run parallel with one another. It's impossible mathematically, scientifically, for shadows lit by the sun to intersect. If you go to the website, you can see two objects, one an astronaut where their shadow is going at 12 o'clock, and a rock about 5 feet away. The shadow is going at 9 o'clock. 90-degree divergence from objects 5 feet apart. Take it from a filmmaker. That's an electrical light that's really close. We just proved the moon landings are fake with one picture. Then we have them faking being halfway to the moon right in front of your eyes.
Yes.
Then we have the logic that you can't have 1,000 times greater space traveling technology in 1969 than today.
Yep.
And then we have an eyewitness. Cyrus Eugene Akers, the chief of security at Kennedy Air Force Base, confessed to murdering a coworker to cover up the moon landing fraud right before he died. So there you go. They didn't go to the moon. What can you do? And if the truth doesn't come out, I don't know what to say, but mankind is doomed if it doesn't. And the president is not serious about disclosure, and telling the truth will actually build trust in the government rather than make it worse.
Now, this counter theory I didn't understand very well. I heard it on the way down here today. Well, the answer to this von Braun hypothesis or statement that we'd need these gigantic rockets taller than the Empire State Building is because lunar lander technology. He said that since we don't have to land on the moon, von Braun was predicting how much you would need to send a rocket up, land it on the moon, bring it back, blast it off the moon. But with the lunar lander, you can go so much lighter. Have you heard that one?
No, he's the rocket designer.
Yeah.
He said these mathematical numbers are irrefutable and unchangeable.
Yep.
That's what he said. They're irrefutable and unchangeable. Musk says with the taller rocket, you have to make 8 fuel trips first. There was a TED Talk. They said it might take 24 fuel trips to ferry up. We have von Braun on camera saying the tallest rocket man can build can only do Earth orbit, and you have to ferry fuel to a space station.
A voyage around the moon must be made in 2 phases. A rocket ship taking off from the Earth's surface will use almost all the fuel it can carry just to attain a speed great enough to balance the pull of gravity. Unpowered, it will then keep circling the Earth in an orbit outside of the atmosphere. This is the first phase. However, if we can refuel the ship in this orbit with fuel brought up by cargo rocket ships, it can set out on the second phase, the trip around the moon and back. To facilitate this refueling operation, we will establish an advanced base in the orbit, 1,000 miles above the Earth. This advanced base, or space station, will be headquarters for the final ascent to the moon.
Elon Musk is saying the exact same thing, right?
Yep.
You have to take 8 fuel trips. Aren't things more efficient as time goes on rather than less efficient?
Yes.
Well, there you go.
Yep. Okay, what about this? Part of the reason for the that America had to pursue this moon landing thing was because we were in a space race with the Soviets. So why wouldn't the Soviet higher-ups had an inkling of what was going on, and why wouldn't they have cried foul?
Yeah, so those are the 2 arguments why they must be real.
Yeah.
All those people were involved, and I've told you that even someone in the command center can tell no difference between a simulation and actual flight, according to the flight director who I spoke to. And then the other answer is, wouldn't the Chinese or the Russians blow the whistle? That's not true at all. For example, let's say I had a picture of a world leader with a prostitute.
Yes.
I could upload it to the internet and ruin their career, and then the photograph is worth nothing. Or I could blackmail them year after year after year. I know someone who personally works in the command center of the Chinese Space Agency, and they told me everybody there knows it's fake. They're not disclosing it publicly in exchange for getting secret technology from NASA that's space-related. Congress says it's illegal to sell space technology to China. China is blackmailing the United States, and the CIA is giving it to them illegally in exchange for not exposing the moon landing fraud. And the same with Russia. One of the latest things that came out, it's on the homepage of Sibrel.com, is about a year ago. The smartest AI in the world, not available to the public, multiple AIs hooked up together, Google's neural network, which they showed off at a convention in Moscow for 3 days. One team had it when they were playing with it, write a symphony, took 2 seconds, write a novel, took 2 seconds, and it has a deep fake detector program that has never been wrong. You can show it a video of Biden or Trump, it'll tell you in 1 second whether it's a deep fake or not. It analyzes all the pixels and the geometry of it. One team fed it pictures of the lunar surface from the unmanned Chinese probes, said they're real. Every Apollo picture it fed them, it said it's fake backdrop, meaning it was taken in a side of a television studio. The smartest AI just said that. We have a video at my website showing Putin being shown the results in real time. Doesn't look surprised at all, actually looks scared that if the truth comes out, maybe some truth about him will come out, or he won't be able to blackmail the U.S. anymore. So, and we have the former Russian space director, the day he retired, said, hey, I wanted to say something I couldn't say when I was working. The moon missions are fake.
When did that come about?
Everybody knows it. That came out about 3 years ago.
Huh.
So RT is supposed to be, anti-corruption. Well, they never covered
Yes.
Putin being shown that the smartest AI in the world just said the moon missions are fake. Never covered it. And if I even leave a comment, what about the AI said that the moon missions were fake in front of Putin in another article about AI,
Yes.
they delete it. So the day after, the former Russian space director says the moon missions are fake, I get a phone call the next day from Fox News. They want to do an hour-long special, whether or not we went to the moon or not. They want to interview me. And they say, look, Mr. Sibrel, we haven't read your book, we haven't seen your films, and even if we find conclusive proof that the moon missions are fake, the program will conclude that they're real to reassure people.
This is what they told you before even getting the interview.
Correct. And this is Fox News. That's not your friend any more than RT is. Otherwise, they wouldn't have fired Tucker Carlson, who got 100 million views for every program he did. Right? They're not in the business to make money like they should be. They're in information control. So I watched their special. They found one Russian scientist from 1969 who said, congratulations. So their narrator said, see, the Russians think we went to the moon. But Fox News failed to report that 6 weeks earlier, the former Russian space director said that the moon missions were fake. So Fox News is lying. RT is lying. They're both controlled and told to produce programs that are reassuring people that the moon missions are real. Back to your debunkers, okay? If they really went to the moon, Dan, anyone who says otherwise is an idiot. So why are there 1,000 YouTube videos that took tens of thousands of hours to produce to reassure a bunch of idiots that the obvious moon landings are real? If I went around saying Mickey Mouse was the first president, not George Washington, do you think there'd be 1,000 videos to reassure people? No, it's not Mickey Mouse. Here are the reasons why. It's really George Washington.
You mentioned the other countries, China, that the footage of the Chinese moon lander is real. They actually did go up there. And in the debunker guy I heard coming down here, he said, yes, other countries have gone to the moon. That's a fact. There just hasn't been a manned moon shot since, when was our last one, 71?
1972.
72. But they have sent up turtles and spiders and, I don't know, other things all the way to the moon. Is that true or is that bunk?
I don't think so. I don't think any animal they've claimed to have landed on the moon. They've sent animals through the radiation belts to see what the exposure would be.
Right.
In fact, that clip at my website where the NASA engineer says, see, people don't know this, but about 1,000 miles up above the Earth is a beginning of a radiation field that's 30,000 miles thick. Every manned mission has been well below it, except going to the moon. The man says they're dangerous, and the technology to go through it and survive has not been invented yet.
I saw that NASA clip of the director saying we still need to solve that problem before we can
we
go
need
beyond.
to solve the radiation problem before we send people through this region of space. But they have to go through that region of space to go to the moon.
Yes.
You see, we must solve these challenges before we send people through this region of space, meaning the challenges have not been solved. Therefore, if they sent someone through it, they would die. Then how did they go to the moon exactly?
Yeah.
And so basically they sent unmanned probes into the radiation with 2 Geiger counters.
Yep.
They should already know that they're not deadly if they went to the moon, right? 6 times to walk and 2 more times to orbit. And they send them back down. So I asked, this is a civilian mission funded by taxpayers. I'm a journalist and an American citizen. Can I please have those readings of those Geiger counters?
Yes.
They said, it's a military secret. And I'm like, okay, now let me make sure I understand this. When you send probes to the sun to measure the temperature of the sun isn't a military secret.
Right.
It's a part of nature.
Sure.
When you send probes to Jupiter to find out how much helium is in Jupiter's atmosphere, that amount isn't a secret, it's just nature. So why would a part of nature, the amount of radiation that an astronaut would have to go through to reach the moon, why is that amount a secret? Because the original Van Allen radiation belt discoverer said it's 100 times a lethal dose. And that's why there's mannequins orbiting the moon instead of people.
Okay, the Wikipedia article on this claims that Van Allen sort of said, "Oh no, I think people can go through." Believe it or not, I could look it up.
Okay, so he of course Wikipedia is defending lies every other page.
That's right.
Right. So originally he said it's 100 times a lethal dose.
Yes.
And if he later says it's not lethal, then the guy's an idiot, doesn't know what he's talking about. So why is he in charge? Same thing with von Braun. First, he says it's going to take 3 800,000-ton rockets to go to the moon. And then he says, it's only going to take 30,000% less rocket power. So if anyone who can convert his math to that degree is incompetent, so why is he in charge? You see, either he's right or incompetent.
Yes.
Right? So if he's incompetent, you can't go to the moon. And if he's right, you can't go to the moon.
Do you think those 2 guys got the phone call?
Well, we have a list of who was there at Cannon Air Force Base when they filmed the first moon landing. It came from President Johnson himself.
Cannon Air Force Base in eastern New Mexico.
Yeah, Clovis, New Mexico. Mm-hmm. Our source, who saw them film the fake moon landing there, was the chief of security at the Air Force's most secure base. President Johnson personally gave him a list of 15 people who were allowed in to eyewitness it. He kept that list as a souvenir. We published it in the book, in both the American and German version. And Van Allen was on that list.
Okay. So these main proofs you talk about, plus the deductive reasoning, in your mind, that's enough. You don't have to get in the sea and the rock and the crosshairs and all that stuff.
It's incidental.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So the spotlight hotspots.
Well, I mean, according to the man who built the camera at Hasselblad, he said these pictures were taken in front of electrical lighting.
Did he?
That's what he said.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Fox special called Conspiracy Theory, Did We Land on the Moon?, which I was a consultant on.
Yeah. Well, speaking of cameras, the 2 camera shots that kind of have me scratching my head are, one, the filming of Armstrong getting off the lunar lander, and 2, that perfectly timed and panned film. I mean, as a movie man, as a photographer, a movie photographer, how did they get that perfect view of the lunar lander blasting back off into space? You know that one.
Well, yeah, there should have been quite a dramatic radio delay between the remote control unit and the guy, and that he guessed correctly. That's a little absurd. The interesting thing about Astronauts Gone Wild, or some of the points in there, is we interview Alan Bean, who says on camera, we did not go through the radiation belts, which is true. They stayed in Earth orbit for 8 days. That way they could go up in front of witnesses and splash down and so forth. And then we have one astronaut saying during the descent, it was, very quiet. which is what we hear on the tape when in fact it should be loud. Then we have Eugene Cernan saying, oh, it was very loud. You can hardly hear each other talk. So which was it? They're a little inconsistent there.
Is there any proof that Stanley Kubrick worked on the studio production of the fake moon landings?
Well, there's deductive reasoning and there's some hints that he did. It's irrelevant who faked it in my mind. The fact is they did fake it. Now, back in 1968, when it was filmed at Cannon Air Force Base, he was simultaneously filming a motion picture about going to the moon, 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh, right.
And the fact is they did fake the moon landing. Someone had to be in charge of those fake images. They could either hire the general of the media department at the Pentagon and get good security but amateur results. Or they could go with the best filmmaker on the planet, Stanley Kubrick, get good results short term and worry about security later, and that's what I would have done. And then in his film The Shining, one of the characters, the little boy, has on a hand-knit Apollo 11 shirt.
Yes.
And then his last film, Eyes Wide Shut, right? People look at that picture of Buzz Aldrin with his arm bent and fail to notice all the wrinkles in a suit that's supposed to be pressurized. How many wrinkles are in a balloon? In any case, people's eyes are wide shut.
I see, yeah.
He insisted contractually that film open on the 30th anniversary of the launch to the moon.
And was it?
It was. Yeah, July 16th, 1999. I think Stanley Kubrick would have found it intriguing to make a film so good that people thought it was real as kind of a feather in his intellectual cap. He either had something to do with it or knew about it. And again, it's irrelevant. I don't say in my book or film that he did it.
Yeah.
It's an interesting theory.
Yep.
There's some clues that indicate that he either had something to do with it or knew about it.
Right. Did the government end up having to admit that some footage was, that was done in a studio because we couldn't recreate it due to the temperatures or whatever, something to do with the film. So yes, these images were recreated so the public would know what's going on. Was there that kind of footage out there too?
Well, a little side note to answer that question. Last time I was in a hotel, I remember flipping through HBO, and 3 of the 10 movies, a third, are about aliens from outer space. Now, if 3 of the 10 movies were about what a jerk Trump is, or 3 of the 10 movies were about what a hero Trump is, you would know there was a concerted effort to steer public opinion. The government really wants us to believe in UFOs for some reason.
Yeah.
And they're doing, congressional hearings about it. Why aren't there congressional hearings about JFK or the moon landing fraud? They want us to believe in it, therefore it's a lie. Now, recently a film came out about going to the moon and them, filming fake pictures. And they wanted us to believe that the pictures were fake, but they really went to the moon. But that's another lie.
Yes.
The reason why they had to do that is because the AI just said the pictures were fake.
Yeah.
So they're scrambling to try to figure out, okay, the pictures are fake. Now, how can we still try to get people to believe they're real so we're not embarrassed? The fact is, people in 1969, 10% of the population before the launch thought they were going to fake it. So the last thing they would do would be to fake any of it because then people would accuse them of faking all of it. It's very simple. If you really went to the moon, you wouldn't have to fake any of it. If they're faking being halfway to the moon, it's because they can't go halfway to the moon. They didn't care. During the alleged live landing, it was an Atari graphic of a little, blip going down to the lunar surface. There were no live pictures. Well, if I were the NASA administrator, I would put a camera on the side of that rocket, house it in protective glass, and I would have a 24/7 picture going all the way from the launch pad, nonstop, all the way to the moon to prove we were really there. Shoot a flare from the moon or something. But they did none of that. They showed as little as possible, and then they only showed a 4th generation image. The networks were like, give us a live feed. They said, no. What we're going to do is we're going to take the image, project it on a big screen with 1969 projection quality, have a TV camera film that, have that go to a TV monitor, and have you film that, when they could have gotten a live feed. And then Ron Howard, his grandfather, warned him The moon missions are fake. He didn't listen. He wants to do this IMAX special. He goes to NASA and says, we're going to transfer all the original footage to HD TV, projected 100 feet wide. They said, give us a few days. And 2 days later, they lost all the footage, preventing it from being transferred to HD.
Wow. How did you know about Ron Howard's grandfather saying this to him?
He admitted he said
it.
so.
Yeah.
And so not only did they destroy intentionally all the original videotapes, they disassembled and threw away all the parts of the only machine that could play them back if the originals were ever found. So it's impossible to play them back anyway. They destroyed all the original telemetry data that shows where the rocket really was. And they destroyed all the schematics, blueprints, and diagrams of the original equipment that showed the battery power that the lunar module used to allegedly get down to 72 degrees of air conditioning on a bank of car batteries for 3 days against 250 degrees, and the fuel and all this. So they would never do that if they really went, but that's exactly what they would do if they perpetrated a fraud. Do you understand?
Yeah.
They spent an equivalent of $250 billion to go to the moon, right? Imagine Bill Gates spending $250 billion to make the first computer. It works fantastic. He throws it into the furnace and all the diagrams. Maybe you should have done that with the atomic bomb.
Yes.
But they didn't, did they?
No.
The B-52 is 70 years old. There's still 200 of them in service. So if they really went to the moon, they would never destroy anything. But that's exactly what you would do if you perpetrated a fraud, which in and of itself is proof of the fraud that they destroyed everything.
And we actually have NASA people, government people on record saying we've lost the technology.
Well, no, they didn't say they lost it. They said they intentionally destroyed it.
Oh, God.
It's one of the clips at Sibrel.com. My book, Moon Man, is interactive. One of the links is their own NASA astronaut saying, we destroyed that technology.
I'd go to the moon in a nanosecond. The problem is we don't have the technology to do that anymore. We used to, but we destroyed that technology, and it's a painful process to build it back again.
Why would they destroy something that cost $250 billion when they won't even destroy the technology of the atomic bomb? You see?
Yes.
They did it to cover up the fraud.
Well, I think we're going to wrap it up right around there. Bart Sibrel, do you have any closing thoughts? And then after your closing thoughts, you can remind us again about your books and where everybody can find you.
Well, if this is for German television,
sure.
Here it is right there, the German version from Kopp Publications of Moon Man, the true story of a filmmaker on the CIA hit list. It's now out in the German language in hardcover. And you can go to Sibrel.com and see on the homepage the testimony of the deathbed confession. All of that is at Sibrel.com.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's really been a pleasure and an honor.
Sure.